Good morning, everybody, and welcome to my show. It's called McDuff Lives. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to Mystery Island Studio, where we've been very, very busy this week, doing 3-4 shows a day, and it's really exciting here at Screaming Osprey's headquarters. And if you want to know what's going on at Screaming Ospreys, well, just make sure and check at screamingospreys.com. And what's Olivia doing over there? Well, she is carrying the flag. Olivia? Yeah, she says reporting for duty. Good morning, Carol M. Nice to have you here. And Kathy Sue, I can see some of the names over there because I recognize them. Everyone else, welcome. TiVo and let's see, Corky Goss. Now, Corky Goss, always nice to have you here. George will be reading his books on BlackBerry RS at noon after John. Okay, and you guys got back up to 1,000. Andy, you must be happy to get over 1,000 at Neighborhood News there.
Yes, I am. I'm just waiting to get struck down again one more time, though.
Well, you know what happens if they strike us down, we get right back up, don't we?
Yep, we got a website in the works, so we're looking to combat it a little bit more this time.
Well, speaking of combat, this morning I thought I would make sure that Olivia showed up, so she is here reporting for duty, and she's going to be kind of being a sentinel here for freedom and liberty, carrying the flag. And the other story this morning, however, is about a entirely different animal, one that kind of creeps up on you, a slow-moving animal, an animal that calls itself the turtle. And the turtle could be sneaking up on our freedoms. What is Olivia going to do when the turtle shows up and says, I want all of your stuff. I want to take away your freedoms. I am here to conquer you. Surprise. And Olivia says, no, you didn't surprise me. I saw you coming, turtle, and I know how to take care of turtles. I stab them and I kill them and they die and they all go away because we don't like turtles here in America. Well, what am I talking about here with my friend Olivia and her adversary here, this otherwise kind of nice looking turtle, but
a turtle's a reptile, right, John?
A reptile, that's right. And it's that reptilian brain that doesn't have any empathy. And well, maybe that's why they chose the turtle. Who chose the turtle? The Fabian Society chose the turtle for their emblem, and they put a little words with that turtle, and you'll see some of those words as we look at a couple of excerpts of some videos that some really good folks have made about the Fabian Society, which is our topic this morning. And on the logo of the turtle, you see the words, when we strike hard. And what that means is that they are playing a long game like the game that we see as the British Empire's long game, the big game, the game to conquer the entire world. So they chose the turtle because they are what they call Fabians, and the Fabian Society is named after an old Roman general who was the initiator, or at least the major proponent and user of guerrilla warfare. In other words, special operations, where you don't have to commit your entire army to win the war. And what we're doing is we're looking for opportunities to win by what? The death of 1,000 cuts, would you call it? Or would you just say that they are going to be chipping away at our freedoms until one day we realize, we've lost everything. And then they rise up and the swastikas come out and go on their sleeves and they say, aha, we got you. We strike hard when we strike. Well, to reinforce this, I'd like Andy now to play the first video, the one which associates Marxism with Fabianism, so that we can see that this thing starts in a small group of people in London in the 1870s and 80s. And not that one, the other one.
You wanted the other one first?
Yes. All right, just a little bit of this one, and I'll move on to the next one.
Fabian society was born in London in the late 19th century.
That's George Bernard Shaw in the middle.
Founding members were a small group of middle-class radicals. These journalists, clerks, and civil servants were restless with the inadequacies of Western society and searching for something new. They wanted to remake the world in a more equitable way, heavily influenced by socialist thinkers of the time. This group had grand ideas for a progressive future. They knew that lasting change in Western countries could only come via catastrophe or a slow and gradual process. The founding members recognized that long-term success would best be achieved by reserving a low-key respectability. Working with sympathetic members of the media, they promoted themselves as a quiet intellectual group. They also sought to protect this reputation by the public excommunication of one member, Havelock Ellis.
All right, let's stop this one here, Andy.
Long before the term
sexual inversion, indeed. That's an aspect of it. I'm not going to spend time on that part of it this morning because the broader picture is much more important, although you'll see, complete resonance with that idea and what's happening today with the alteration of sexuality by chemical and psychological means. It's, I think, part of the same program. But let's not get off on that. I want to now talk about what you saw in that video. The first thing that you saw was that this was a bunch of middle-class shopkeepers, that were mutually upset about how the world was going and decided there's a better way, and we're going to go with socialism. But that is false. The people in the first picture surrounding George Bernard Shaw, those are the real instigators of Fabianism. So we have a myth that it's something that came out of the people or was a popular movement, but in fact, it is the idea of these people who were in that George Bernard Shaw circle, and I would include in there Thomas Huxley, the promoter of Charles Darwin, and Huxley, the grandfather of Aldous Huxley. Let's if you go to that one pic right there, that picture, the green one with the hammer and sickle on it, and let's just think about that. Go back one frame there. Let's think about this for a second. This is way back in 1880, 1890 or so. By hammer and hand doth all things stand. Well, the hammer, you'll see later in the second video that we're going to talk about, but you recognize the arm and hammer of the person, that was named Arm & Hammer, the man who did deals with the communists was Arm & Hammer. Hammer and hand did not come out of the brain of Lenin, however. This is the British Fabian Society using that exact same emblem, which shows up on the flag of the communist countries and is emblematic of real communism. Creeping Marxism, the Fabian Society, Aims and Origins, that's the name of that particular video. So this one gives us some interesting connections, even though they're not intending to reveal. Now, the next video is actually very recently produced, and it's a private producer. I didn't note the name of the person that made this video, but I think it's a great video. I published it on my Twitter yesterday, and let's just go ahead and start there. Now, consider who these folks were and who they are now in connection with my question, which I posted on Twitter this morning, is the Fabian Society, is that the same thing as the deep state, what we now call the deep state? And I think there's a very strong argument to be made that, yes, this is. All right, let's go ahead.
Is a tribute to the poem she wrote, End of the Century, 1984. And again, Orwell came to know Aldous Huxley personally and studied under him, and later Huxley issued basically a rebuttal to 1984. And Huxley, who moved in very high circles, introduced George Orwell to a lot of very influential people, many of them part of the Fabian Socialist. And the Huxleys themselves were involved, but maybe not official members. Bertrand Russell was involved, and they were very close with the founders, including H.G. Wells, who was very much a Huxley acolyte himself, having basically risen to prominence under T.H. Huxley's tutelage. So through that connection, George Orwell came to know a lot of these people and came to despise a lot of them and talk bad about them. Well, the first publication by the Fabians in 1884 was Why Are the Many Poor? And it talked about how to remedy by reallocating wealth of the rich and powerful, dismantling structures, and building social institutions that were supposedly more equitable. And it contains the famous quote that is attributed to the Roman general Fabius Maximus, from where the Fabians get their name, as well as their implemented gradualism. Why are the many poor proclaimed, quote, for the right moment you must wait, as Fabius did most patiently when warring against Hannibal, though many censured his delays. But when the time comes, you must strike hard, as Fabius did, or you will be waiting in vain and fruitless. And so that relates directly to one of the Fabian's several logos, which is that of a turtle, an angry tortoise, slowly moving along. How does he beat the rabbit in the race to the finish line? Well, he moves steadily, progressively, gradually. But when I strike hard. And so the Fabians were in favor of a full move into socialism and a takeover of the state and society. But from a practical standpoint, they thought it should be implemented gradually. But there's also their coat of arms, which is quite telling, and that is a depiction of a wolf in sheep's clothing, a deception. And reading from the website ForbiddenSymbols.com on the Fabian Society reads, according to author John Perdue, the logo of the Fabian Society, a tortoise, represents the group's predilection for a slow, imperceptible transition to socialism, while its coat of arms, a wolf in sheep's clothing, represented its preferred methodology for achieving its goal. But the wolf in sheep's clothing symbolism was later abandoned due to its obvious negative connotations. And even though Orwell, aka Eric Blair, was very much a socialist and a proud socialist, he took very serious issue with a lot of the leading socialists, especially from the Fabian corner. And he saw them as basically middle class and upper class and snobbish and hateful of the poor and very, very cold. There was actually an essay written by Arnold Toynbee, the longtime president of the Chatham House, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, and he wrote an essay in his book Acquaintances about the Webbs titled Are They Human?, where he all these examples of how they're very cold human beings, and everybody knows that, and they've called them out, and they're very calculating. But a couple times he saw them be nice to people when they didn't really have to be, and And that was when he knew, yeah, they're human, and Orwell saw a lot of the same behavior. And he wrote a great deal about this in his book, The Road to Wigan Pier, which was published in 1937, about a year, I think, before he published his other essay on Wells, Hitler, and the World State, where he just laid out all the things wrong with H.G. Wells' thinking and undermining Hitler. In the same sort of time period in The Road to Wigan Pier, Orwell takes to task George Bernard Shaw and the Webbs, all of whom were founders of the Fabian Socialist, who founded it, by the way, along with Edward R. Peace, who was very wealthy and actually worked on the London Stock Exchange before he received a huge inheritance that allowed him to basically retire and start funding all these labor and socialism causes. Very rich irony. Anyway, Orwell writes in chapter 11, meanwhile, what about socialism? And he writes a lot about socialism. He's in favor of socialism, but he's extremely critical of their complete detachment in the literary circles and the academia circles and the literary circles from the working people, the honest and hardworking people who they see as dirty and unclean and unlearned and just have this whole attitude. And after he takes George Bernard Shaw to task for not only being snobbish and demeaning towards working class people, but for supporting dictators and even suggesting that poverty and the habits of mind created by poverty are something to be abolished from above by violence if necessary, as well as his support for both Stalin and Mussolini, he gets into Miss Sidney Webb's autobiography, which would be Beatrice Webb, where Orwell says, quote, you get the same thing in a more mealy-mouthed form in Miss Sidney Webb's autobiography, which gives unconsciously a most revealing picture of the high-minded socialist slum visitor. The truth is that to many people calling themselves socialist, Orwell writes, revolution does not mean a movement of the masses with which they hope to associate themselves. It means a set of reforms which, quote, we, the clever ones, are going to impose upon, quote, them, the lower orders. On the other hand, it would be a mistake to regard the book-trained socialist as a bloodless creature entirely capable of emotion. Though seldom giving much evidence for affection for the exploited, he is perfectly capable of displaying hatred, a sort of queer theoretical in vacua hatred against the exploiters. And he goes into how they basically denounce the bourgeois and the upper class lifestyle, yet they live it themselves. They ascribe to it. They come on in. They live that way. And hardly would they ever be caught dead, with the mannerisms of the poor and working class. They wouldn't slurp their soup. They wouldn't drink after people. They saw those people as disgusting. So yeah, wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean, this is a deceptive movement. And, H.G. Wells even published a book called The Open Conspiracy. And, it sounds open, but it's also very deceptive. They state it openly, but they bring it in quietly, gradually, so that nobody notices. I mean, it's evil, but it's genius, basically. And of course, Orwell doesn't point out that Shaw has supported dictators just in order to discredit him. This is central to the deception, the wolf in sheep's clothing, that the Fabians represent a progressive socialist society, which was a sort of popular umbrella view. But more in line with communists, they actually accept and in many ways promote dictatorship.
People who only know me from reading my books, or sometimes even from seeing my plays, get a most unpleasant impression of.
Sidney and Beatrice Webb, the two main founders of the Fabian group, openly supported imperialism and monopoly. They supported Britain in redistributing parts of Africa and creating a, British-led Cecil Rhodes state. They supported, corporate monopolies because they thought smaller groups just would be harder to work with, and they could theoretically make things better for workers under gigantic corporations, which we could see now in hindsight. They're just impossible seemingly to keep in check, but this is the kind of stuff they had in mind. And so, as H.G. Wells, among others, makes clear, really the Fabian socialists aren't so much about empowering the poor people and bringing them up to par with everyone else. It's really about putting the state in charge. The real goal here is organization by collectivism, And this, I think, is at the heart of Orwell's critique of the Fabians and of their type of socialism, and why I believe he probably did name 1984 ultimately after the Fabian Socialist, and not just after his wife's poem about the end of the century, 1984, although it does give us a sort of connecting hint that it has to do with the century. And this shows in the book within a book within 1984, the outlawed Emmanuel Goldstein book titled The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. Oligarchical collectivism, a form of collectivism that ultimately benefits the oligarchy. Sold to people on Marxist ideas of communism, sold to people as a friendly socialism that would level things for the poor and make things nicer, but ultimately working to the benefit and the concentration of power of the ruling oligarchy. Orwell was very critical of the elitist ties of the Fabians. And again, I think it shows in the banned book within a book in 1984, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. That's the wolf in sheep's clothing. They sell themselves on socialism, but they're really oligarchical collectivists. Collectivists, not for the benefit of the people, not even for the benefit of a single dictator, but for the oligarchy, the ruling class, the very tiny concentrated power, the 150 people or whatever number you want to ascribe to it, who rule the world. The party seeks power not for the people, but entirely for its own sake. They're not interested in the good of others.
Power entirely for its own sake. We are not interested in the good of others. Does that not describe our day today? Doesn't that describe our foreign policy and the foreign policy of war? Of we don't care about, these other, so-called humans. We are the only people we care about. We are the oligarchs. We are the old families. We are descended from ancient Roman nobility. We are the ones that God himself has entrusted the world to. And the rest of you guys are just a bunch of, fairly useful mammals, as long as we have use for you. But when we don't need you anymore, you'll go the way of the albatross. You'll be gone. That is the chilling story that we have. And is it not the same thing that we seem to be fighting in our minds that I call the deep state, or sometimes I call it the creep state, because they're creeps. They have no empathy. You can't trust them. We have talked about false flag attacks. And what is a false flag attack except for a Fabian attack? It's let's just sail up there close, flying that Danish flag or that Spanish flag, and you just kind of slip right into their harbor, and they don't even notice you. And then, boom! You open your gun ports and you run up the British flag, and you blow away, 5 or 6 ships, and the rest of them surrender, and you win. You won by deception. Whose motto is that? We win by deception. Kind of hard to tell if that's true or not, isn't it? Pardon me a second. Not win by deception. That's a lie. Andy, now I want to do an exercise of in real time. I want you to try to figure out what Fabian means suppose you didn't know anything about Fabians or Fabianism or any of that stuff, and somebody said, you ought to look up Fabian. Well, let's go to Google if you will, and just put one word in the search box, and that word is Fabian, and see what we get. Make all of that nice and big so everybody can see it. Now, do you see that beautiful blonde? Well, he has highlights, okay, but is he not, the perfect teeth, the good-looking guy? Well, yeah. Let me scroll down a little bit, Andy, so you can see that on the first page of Google, there isn't a single reference to the Fabian Society. People named Fabian, but mainly he is the subject. Okay, there's Fabianism as derived from the Roman general, but we would have to dig in to understand that it has something to do with this Fabian Society. Okay, well, it takes a few scrolls down, but you get my point that the idea of Fabianism may have been obscured by our media, by our entertainment moguls intentionally by picking this guy. Now, go ahead and open his Wikipedia. And I just want to make a point about Fabian. We could talk about Pat Boone or even Elvis in this context, and it's kind of sad, really. But if you go down to the text, Andy, I want to read a little bit of that discovery. Okay, Forte was discovered by Bob Marcucci and Peter DeAngelis, owners of Chancellor Records. At the time, record producers were looking to the South Philadelphia neighborhoods in search of teenage talents with good looks. Well, Marcucci was a friend of Fabian's next-door neighbor. One day, Fabian's father had a heart attack. And while he was being taken away in an ambulance, Marcucci spotted Fabian. Fabian later recalled, he kept staring at me and looking at me. I had a crew cut, but this was the day of Ricky Nelson and Elvis. He comes up and says to me, "So, if you're ever interested in the rock and roll business," and hands me his card. I looked at the guy like he was out of his mind. I told him, "Leave me alone. I'm worried about my dad." When Fabian's father returned from the hospital, he was unable to work. So when Marcucci persisted, Fabian and his family were amenable, and he agreed to record a single. Frankie Avalon, also of South Philadelphia, suggested Forte, that's Fabian Forte, as his first name was actually Fabiano, the Italian. But did they not just chop off that O in order to make him Fabian? Maybe it's a little more attractive to American teenage girls, but if you were to read this whole article, you'd learn that he didn't sing. He could not sing. He was not a singer. But they decided that he was going to be the next teenage idol singer. So he lip-synced like Milli Vanilli. He lip-synced a number of singles that became big hits because of his image and whoever was doing the actual singing. Well, this was how they built this man's career. And the reason that I call your attention to that is to remind you of what I think they've done also to Bob Marley, where a book which I got in Jamaica, I don't think you can even get it here. It's called Marley and Me, subtitled The Don Taylor Story, written by his first and most long manager. And that book describes a lot of the underside of the life of Bob Marley and the relationship with the record companies and what they wanted him to do. That book, I think, was covered up by the title of a book that was very, very big about 10 or 15 years ago, also called Marley and Me, but this time about my life in love with the world's worst dog. Well, yeah, Don Taylor, that's the one. So anyway, I do have a copy of that book about Marley, but aren't these not two examples of deception? Of by deception we will win. The covering up of things that are inconvenient, inconvenient to history, inconvenient to what Cheryl Atkinson calls the narrative. And we do have a narrative being spun constantly by the Biden administration now. It's detached from reality. It has nothing to do with reality. It's just a story that they're telling us. It's a big deception. The whole big psyop that has been put on us, from the CIA to the British intelligence, the Tavistock Institute, and all of that, is a huge example of Fabian strategy. Subtly sneaking in, and changing the words of history, covering up things you don't want people to know, and emphasizing lies that you'd like them to accept as truth. That is, to me, is Fabianism. And the goal of Fabianism has been stated right here in this book, The Time Machine, by H.G. Wells himself, to divide humanity over centuries into a small group of wise people, the Morlocks, and the rest of us, which are the happy, multiple, procreative, happy guys that just live short lives and don't have a clue as to how the world really works, because these wise people have, created a breakaway civilization, if Joseph P. Farrell's words are appropriate. That's what they are. That's why they have created all of these caves and tunnels and, space vehicles that we don't get to see or understand. This is their separation of themselves as the wise ones from us, the goofy ones that don't really know history, don't know technology. We just kind of enjoy ourselves as we drive our SUVs around to soccer practice. This fake, almost Stepford Wives type of world where, drugs are very heavily involved in keeping us happy and also keeping us in trouble. Well, let's get back to that video, because I want to talk about the stained glass window, and you'll see once again that hammer and hand come up, which started way back in the 19th century with the
benefit
original
of a single
Fadians.
dictator.
Now let's skip forward until you see the picture of the stained glass. And Andy, I didn't make an actual mark for you. Right there. Let's go back a little bit.
About the
A little bit
Fabian
further.
Window.
A little bit further. Because I need to talk about two more subjects, and I'm running out of time. So the first one is, you guys have all heard of the London School of Economics. The London School of Economics may be the most prestigious economics institution in the world. It is the place where all of the great scholars would... Oops, audio. It's London School of Economics is the place where, the great people would go to study, and people that are great are people like Milton Friedman, for instance. Well, who started the London School of Economics? Okay, I won't play the Jeopardy music for you, but think about it for a second, and then I'm going to tell you. It was the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society started the London School of Economics. For what purpose? To use the power of capital and economics theory in order to implement slowly over time their dream civilization of, the Morlocks and the Eloys. And they're going to be the Morlocks, like Klaus Schwab says, you will not own anything, but you will be happy. Yeah, I don't think so, because I think you're going to own everything and you're going to be happier than I am. And I don't like that. That's not fair. A. Baker, thanks for posting that. It's Truthstream Media, and they're the ones that did this excellent video. So now let's bring in and connect the idea that this window we're going to see is in the London School of Economics and represents the placement of the Fabian ideas into the heart of the London School of Economics.
Melissa, about the Fabian Window, which depicts the actual founders, again, the Webbs and George Bernard Shaw. It shows them hammering away and literally remaking the world closer to their heart's desire, literally pounding out the New World Order, literally reshaping the world according to the dictates of their very sly and indiscreet society. And that really kind of underscores what this group is all about, based on my research anyway. H.G. Wells actually said that for him, collectivism was a religion. It was the open aim of his open conspiracy. He wanted collectivism to be the opiate of the masses because it was a system that just like George Bernard Shaw said, could feed them, could clothe them, could make sure they had plenty and that they lived well. It was a system that would provide for them, but it could also destroy them.
You must all know half a dozen people at least who are no use in this world, who are more trouble than they are worth. Just put them there and say, sir or madam, now will you be kind enough to justify your existence? If you can't justify your existence, if you're not pulling your weight in the social vote, if you're not producing as much as you consume, or perhaps a little more, then clearly we cannot use the big organization of our society for the purpose of keeping you alive, because your life does not benefit us and it can't be of very much use to yourself.
This is what he said. This is a quote. Under socialism, you would not be allowed to be poor. You would be forcibly fed, clothed, lodged, taught, and employed, whether you liked it or not. If it were discovered that you had not character and industry enough to be worth all of this trouble, you might possibly be executed in a kindly manner, but whilst you were permitted to live, you would have to live well. And what's living well? It's what they decide living well is. It's not what you decide.
It was a system where the state was God, where the state itself was the system where power was to be invested, and that state had the power to sterilize people in the name of eugenics and even to euthanize them in the name of efficiency and in the name of finding people to be worthless from an economic standpoint, from an input-output standpoint, that they would basically sanction the death of people, not for being poor, not for committing a crime, but for the crime of not benefiting the state, of not producing value for it, and thereby having a negative value that warrants their death. It's a system that, as H.G. Wells said, puts the state, puts the collectivist system as the religion, and they've depicted this on a stained glass window, evoking a sort of religious piety. It's a stained glass window, has religious iconography and connotation. And this was designed by the playwright George Bernard Shaw and the writer. And it depicts, again, these founders hammering away at the world. The world is on their anvil. They're reshaping it just under their wolf in sheep's clothing coat of arms. And the caption reads, "Remold it nearer to the heart's desire." And then it reads lower down in a triangular shield, "Pray devoutly, hammer stoutly." And it shows 10 or so disciples on their knees praying before the books and tracts written by the group, pray devoutly, while the inner circle, the founders, while they're hammering stoutly and remaking the world nearer to the heart's desire. They're reshaping the world and they're reordering things. They're using the ancient black magic of the blacksmith's hammer and anvil to reshape things as if they were Hephaestus in Olympus or what have you, It's a tremendous boast of power. And anyway, I was telling Melissa about that after we had filmed the London School of Economics and we had rounded the corner I think the night before, and saw the Fabian Society headquarters, which is now just basically a political party group. And they just have a plain sign on the outside. And she was looking it up on the phone, and she said, that stained glass window is on display inside the London School of Economics. So the next day, we worked our way back downtown, caught a cab. It was really bad traffic, I remember. And we walked over there, and we walked in, and, we just walked into the lobby. The place was open. They don't have anybody checking you or anything. It's a school. And we went up to the third or the fourth floor, I don't remember which, end of the library, where it was on display. And we walked in, and we were able to film at the real Fabian Socialist stained glass window. And the window shows what I thought looked like H.G. Wells, but it's really Edward R. Peace, again, who worked on the London Stock Exchange, came from an extremely wealthy family. He's there along with Sidney Webb. He and his wife, Beatrice, founded it, and they're next to George Bernard Shaw. And again, they're in this inner coterie, the elitist circle of the founders, above the masses who are on their knees praying to the books and the ideas and the slogans of the group in the name of socialism and the name of collectivism, which H.G. Wells said would be a religion, that it was a religion to him, and that collectivism would be an opiate of the masses to the people, just as other writers have also said religion is the opiate of the masses. He now says collectivism would be, because, collectivism can provide.
It was commissioned by George Bernard Shaw in 1910 and depicts Shaw, Webb, Wells, Peace, and other Fabians.
With a recommendation. See it on YouTube. It's called Understanding.
I think something's wrong with your mic right now.
Let's see. Is it maybe there was a loose connection in the cable, Andy? It could be. I think I'm back now.
No, you're using this.
All right, over here to mic number 2. And mic number 2 seems to be working just fine. So let's remember TruthStream Media, to thank them, support their Patreon, as I know they're doing something on shoestring like we are here at Osprey Studio. And I would like you to watch their whole video, because it really I think we're still on. Okay. All right. A little technical stuff happening here before I make my last point for the morning, which is Isaac Asimov's foundation. Okay. Now, these are all tied together, which I think I'm the first person to do this. And I did it about 2 or 3 months ago in a Mindfields, where I spent the morning describing how the book Foundation, written by Isaac Asimov, very famous, people call it the basis of all science fiction in some cases. Anyway, a very, very famous science fiction book and trilogy. The premise of that book is that there is a plan created by a genius whose name is Harry Selden, and it's called the Harry Selden Plan. And the book, it's a collection of essays made into a book. It's a little hard to follow the track of it, but it's exciting to think about all of these, planets, and one planet at this end of the universe and the other of the galaxy, and another planet at the other. And in these little planets, all the great scientists got together to try to expedite the evolution of mankind, to get us far faster to that happy future that we all dream about than nature itself can do. Think about that in terms of gain of function research that we've been talking about in terms of creating bioweapons. Well, It's the same principle that we're going to speed up time because we have technology that can do that. And by doing that, we are going to benefit humanity as a whole, even though a lot of humans as individuals are going to be wiped out by it. Is that not the Fabian dream? To benefit humanity by raising the intellect, by raising the health, the capacity, the ability of these new supermen to think and create and, you know, conquer the planet, conquer the universe. Well, let me now direct your attention, Andy, to one last request, and that is if you put on Google the two names, Harris and Selden, because they spell his name Harry, H-A-R-I, but the whole book, my theory, is a subtle exposition of the Fabian deep state dream for humanity. So if you could look up H-A-R-R-I-S. Okay, Arthur Selden. Just punch that one. Arthur Selden was the joint founder, president with Ralph Harris of the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is part of the London School of Economics. Okay? Toto's really mad about this, by the way. Ralph Harris is the Harry, H-A-R-I. And Arthur Selden is the Selden, the last name. So the Harry Selden plan that you've read about in Foundation is the Fabian plan. If you get into the text of the book, you'll notice that everything kind of gets directed into these people called traders and these planets that are run by dictators, and the entire power system of the whole galaxy is nuclear power, but it's a secret nuclear power that nobody else knows about. Only the Morlocks, in the sense of H.G. Wells, or only the scientists, the super smart people living on Trantor. Yep, London School of Economics right there. So these two guys, Harris and Selden, are the proponents of pure capitalism, of Galton and Malthus and Adam Smith. They are the guys that are refashioning eugenics into an economic program for the future. And they have written, there's tons of essays and everything. You can see that Hayek, the great Austrian school, Milton Friedman, and who else comes into the picture but Margaret Thatcher? Because who supported Margaret Thatcher and put her in a position to be the prime minister, if not the same guys? The London School of Economics, Arthur Selden, and Lord Ralph Harris, because they made him a lord, were behind the Thatcher candidacy. And you can see that from Thatcher, we get to global warming to the Great Reset and the Green New Deal. It's all tied together. Thank you. That's my show for this morning. Great job, Andy. And if you put all these things together, maybe we can explain it to the world that, hey, you know, this is not nature. These people are doing this. It is deceptive. It is the turtle versus the hare strategy, and they are winning, but they are not going to win as long as we, sorry about that, Olivia, as long as we get up and stand up for our rights. We see that turtle coming, you know, he's coming around the bend, you know, and we are going to have to just deal with it and get rid of him and return back to freedom.